Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. This is Force, and today we will be talking about Lords of the Fallen. I'd like to give you my final thoughts on the game. Just last evening, I completed a single playthrough, and I'm actually now working my way through New Game Plus, and I'm going to keep playing it because, man, it's a fun game to play. Now, this is just going to be sort of a stream of consciousness thoughts on the game after completing it. This is not a straight-up review where I'm going to say, positives, check, 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 negatives, check, 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 and then give you a review score. That's not what this video is. I'm just going to talk about what I think about the game after finishing it, but I will touch on, yes, the good things, and yes, the bad things, because there are bad things. There are problems that this game has. There are areas where this game is lacking. But overall, I think it was a really enjoyable experience, and I'm looking forward to diving in further. So let's discuss it. First of all, single playthrough clocked in at just under 12 hours. Now, with that said, I have 24 total hours logged into Steam. Force, how is that possible? It is because my 12-hour save was one of many saves. Prior to my full playthrough and that single 12-hour save, I did basically the intro several times, which was each save anywhere between like 3 and 6 hours. I just kept replaying the start of the game in hopes of learning more about it, and I did discover quite a bit, such as how to best utilize the magic find in that game to try to guarantee you're getting at least purple drops on the item sets from chest, which are going to mean higher stats, places for sockets. I figured out that there are unique ways to defeat every boss, and if you do it, then you're going to get a special enhanced version of the item that they drop, which is a really neat system that I might cover in a future video. You can also search the Lords of the Fallen subreddit. It has some discussion about this very thing going on right now. So yeah, I played the game for 24 hours. A single playthrough clocked me in just under 12 hours, but with all of that experience, that single playthrough probably would have been closer to like 15 to 20 hours, if you catch my drift. Because I was able to breeze through the intro area that in the past took me a lot longer time because I kept redoing it, you know what I mean? Let's just say, for argument's sake, the gameplay would probably put me 15 to 20 hours for a single playthrough. So that's not, that's not bad. It is a $50 game. It's not like a fully priced $60 game. But what about the gameplay? What about the game itself? Well, the gameplay, as we've talked about in prior videos, is pretty much identical to Dark Souls, with a little less depth, I would say. There are a fewer things that you can do that you can do in Dark Souls. There's less special move sets and special attacks with each type of weapon. There's less ways to interact with the enemy. There's just a few less things that you have the option of doing, but the game also adds in a few interesting elements. We've got a set skill tree in which you're going to get 4 skills, so you pick one skill tree in your first playthrough, one of 3, and then when you go into New Game Plus, actually at the start of New Game Plus, it says pick your second skill tree, and I'm now working up the first one I picked like the warrior skill tree, and I'm now working up the rogue skill tree, so I've got access to both skill lines on my single New Game Plus character. And then when I move into New Game Plus, I'll have access to all 3 of the magic skill lines. So we've got unique access to magic skill lines. Now, Dark Souls had the spells and all of that, but all in all, I would say that yes, its combat is basically like Dark Souls light version. So not quite as much depth and a little bit easier. I feel like it's a little bit more forgiving. You're not taking quite as much damage from enemies, and that also applies now that I'm in New Game Plus. It doesn't seem quite as challenging, the enemies. Some enemies can kill you very quickly, but overall, I did not die nearly as many times as I've died in Dark Souls 1 and Dark Souls 2. Not even close. There are several bosses in the game, even late game bosses, that I defeated in my very first attempt. With the exception of maybe like the first or second boss in Dark Souls and Dark Souls 2, that was not the case for any other boss. I always died before I could defeat it. And it seems a little bit more forgiving here, but maybe in New Game Plus that will change, but overall it seems a little more forgiving. The dodge rolling is very, very forgiving. You've got a lot of leeway in terms of the length of the roll animation and just how many hits you can avoid. It's just forgiving. So let's try to avoid any more comparison to Dark Souls discussion, but let's just say, yeah, it's like a a little bit less death, and a little more forgiving version of Dark Souls. And those are, some people definitely see those as negatives, but again, it is really fun to play. The game looks beautiful. I absolutely love the art style and just the graphical fidelity of this game. I think it looks phenomenal. The last dungeon in this game, the set pieces were so cool. It was a interesting mystery to unlock. You know, you go in there and there's all these locked doors and there's all these secret passages, and throughout going through the dungeon and unlocking a new piece that lets you go to the next area and a new piece that lets you go to the next area, and then just seeing sort of the scenery in there and this one big gargantuan enemy in the background, that in addition to like the catacombs and a few of the other areas, it's a pretty game. Now, it's not a super diverse game. In terms of areas that you have to explore, there's basically the keep area. That's where you saw in the first video that we explored. And then you go to an outside version of the keep. And then you go into this graveyard area. And then you go through a portal to the Rogar, or I forgot exactly what they're called. But the enemies in this game, you go to a portal into their world. So there's really only like 3 or 4 different areas in this game. There's not a ton of diversity. You're not going all over the place in this huge mysterious world. After finishing the game, I would say that the space that the game takes up, it does feel very small, but it was very detailed. There was a lot of nooks and crannies to explore. There were a fair amount of secret passages, which most of the time boils down to either we've got a set of barrels blocking somewhere that you can go, or there's a huge crack in the wall that's always very obvious, and if you charge it with your shield up, you're going to bust right through it. But there were a few secret areas that led to some interesting things, and discovering the catacombs for me was also a very cool and unique and fun experience. But overall, the game space, it does feel small and not super varied. Now, another thing that I think is possibly a little problematic is that there's zero form of multiplayer in this game, and I know that that's something that did hold the Souls series up for quite a bit, just to have that competitive action against other people. I don't know how it would make sense in this game, because this game does have a singular, unique character that the story revolves around. Your main character, the one that you play, you know, it's just you, and the way the story is set. Whereas in the Souls game, the multiplayer makes sense. There's all sorts of like heroes, fallen people throughout whatever, and you're fighting their spirits and whatnot. I don't know crap about the story reasons behind the Dark Souls PvP. But I guess I could see in this game how that type of PvP wouldn't make sense given their huge narrative focus. Now let's talk about that. The voice acting I thought was trash. Some of it was good, but it was very hit and miss. It was just overall, I wasn't super impressed with the voice acting. Not that I could do any better, but just expressing my opinion based on comparison to other games and whatnot. So I thought that voice acting was hit or miss. The story, I guess it was largely forgettable. I did like the very end, though. Yeah, I thought, and I don't want to spoil it for you, but I would say that the very end, it adds a twist, as so many games do at the end. It adds a twist that I thought was interesting, because throughout the story, there's a single narrative that's being driven. And then at the very end, they completely flip it. And it wasn't just that they said, A has changed to B. Like, this is different now. They made me really think with the story they were telling. They made the way it was delivered, and there was a paradigm shift. There was a change in perspective that I actually thought through when I was watching the cutscene and listening to what was being said. It hit me. I'll say that. I thought it was an interesting ending. You know, not everyone's going to have that same opinion, I'm sure, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the ending. And I mean, it was fun to play. I guess that's really all I want to say to wrap it up. It was fun to play. If you run through blind from start to finish, expect it to take you between 15 and 20 hours, and then you can add New Game Plus and New Game Plus Plus on top of it, although I expect those subsequent playthroughs to take significantly less time because you have experience, you know how to beat the bosses, and even though the enemies have increased in toughness, so far what I've seen from New Game Plus Plus, they haven't increased in toughness to the extent that it should take you longer. In fact, I expect it to take you much shorter in subsequent playthroughs just because of experience, even though enemies might have more hit points. And that's Lords of the Fallen. I don't really know what much else to say. Really big positives for me. The gameplay is fun, even if it is a slightly tuned down version of Dark Souls. The game looks glorious. I love the way it looks, specifically like the art direction too, and some of the armor sets and all of that. There were a few interesting twists from the enemies, but overall, we did see a fair amount of repeating. There wasn't a ton of variety. I got a couple of new enemies at the very end of the game, but even that, like, they were there, and then the game was over, so you didn't get to see much of them. Overall, not too much variety in this game in terms of the NPCs or the locations that you're visiting, but it was a fun game to play. And that's my final thoughts on Lords of the Fallen. There might be future updates because I'm going through New Game Plus. I might do some videos talking about the special ways to defeat each of the bosses to give you the unique items, but I don't expect I'm probably going to get much further. Even if I finish through New Game Plus and do New Game Plus Plus, I don't see much of an incentive to play the game after that. Once I finish that, there's no additional difficulty, and it basically just stops there. You could make a brand new character, but I don't think I'm going to, especially with no multiplayer, which Dark Souls had at least that incentive to drive it forward. I don't know that I'd get much more from that. But if that's enough for you, and if you like what you have heard and what you have seen, then maybe pick up Lords of the Fallen. All right, guys, thanks so much. Hope you have a fantastic afternoon. I will see you tomorrow. Keep watching and keep owning.